here we have Paul Johnson. I've not met Paul, but he has received more accolades for teaching than I think is possible, which I don't understand why, but I think we'll probably find out. He's also the author of a number of books, all of which we've read. In part, The Most Important Thing Illuminated was edited or added to by him. So I'd like to introduce Paul Johnson. How do you get all those accolades for teaching? Maybe we'll find out.
So I guess I'm supposed to use it. I walk around a lot when I teach. I was very flattered when Guy reached out and said, would you speak at this event? And I said, great. What he didn't tell me is I'm going to follow the woman who's leading the 250th year anniversary of the founding of the country and a gentleman who's going to solve health care. And then I'm followed by Manish. I mean, like, what the fuck? How is this possible? So, we'll go back to reality. I'll tell you Warren Buffett's story. So I'm an adjunct professor. I've been an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School for 32 years. I started when I was 8. I look young, short haircut. The most famous professor there is a guy named Bruce Greenwald. Many of you know him, read his work. He was a very important mentor to me when I was a young professor. My favorite story is that Bruce taught, anybody take a class from Bruce or a lecture from Bruce? All right, so you have a few of them. Well, Bruce's favorite word is fuck. And so I would go to his lectures. I sat through a lot of lectures. And I realized as a professor, you can say fuck and not get fired. Except that I didn't realize is he's tenured. I'm an adjunct. So that was my politics. All right, so every year, Bruce taught this class where he had famous investors come. And in the 90s, Warren would come every other year. That was the deal. He graduated from the school and he felt he would give back. Around 2000, he stopped going and invited students into Omaha. 1997, Bruce goes on sabbatical and he calls me up and he said, would you teach the course? I said, sure, I'd love to. And so Warren's going to show up in person and Seth Klarman shows up for the lecture. And so we have that green room, although it's just a classroom, where you sit before you go into the classroom. And I'm in this little thing with Seth Klarman and Warren Buffett. And this is before we have iPhones, so I brought a camera, a little Canon. And I'm sitting there, and I feel like the little kid at Thanksgiving dinner that just graduated from the little table to the parents' table. These guys are talking, and I'm going, wow. Wow, this is great. And I'm so embarrassed, I never pulled the camera out of my pocket to take the picture with Warren. So there you go. So, and I laugh about it. I probably have more jokes about that than anything else. All right, the one thing that Warren said, we're going to go back to investing, sorry. The one thing that Warren says, he's been saying it since the early 90s, is that there is no distinction between value and growth. If you go back and read everything, he's very consistent. And he says, quite frankly, growth is part of the value equation. And that is terrific. Love it. He then says regularly, and we saw some quotes earlier today, where he says, it's really simple. Go figure out what something's worth. And then if it trades less than that, and it has enough of a margin of safety, you're in business. Okay, great. One problem, no one has solved, how do you value growth? So we go into this whole thing and we say, well, just value this. Well, this little growth thing is not insignificant. So I'm going to present today some work I've been working on. And I was limited to 7 slides. The normal presentation is like 300, but we'll go through it. All right, so here's a classic DCF. It's just a 15-year DCF. Don't worry about the terminal value. It's just a 15-year. And this is the problem. How do you value that? And anybody that's used a DCF model of any kind, and by the way, a multiple is just a truncated DCF, don't kid yourself, you know that your assumption on growth swings your value from little to a lot. And if I'm supposed to have high confidence in my estimate of value and then compare that to price, I have a problem. And that is growth is going to make it really tricky. So let's just do one thing. Let's separate the problem into 2 issues. One, let's value a company that has the same cash flow forever And then let's go figure out the growth piece. Now, a lot of my students at this point say, Professor, how could you ever find a company that has growth forever? I mean, a solid, that base blue forever, that consistent earnings? No company does. You're like, good point, except every multiple, every DCF, every EBITDA multiple assumes that part of the cash flow is going to last forever. That's the assumption of every valuation model. So I'm like, sorry, we've already built that one in. Next question. So that's there, folks. Not a big assumption. Where it becomes sort of tricky for people to get their heads wrapped around it is the idea, well, I'm forecasting it. I'm forecasting. Well, no, we've already forecast that. Green is the problem. Valuing blue is trivial. That's just a perpetuity cash flow. It's a simple multiple. Just take your discount rate, invert that, use a cap rate, whatever you want. Valuing blue is trivial. Green's hard. That becomes the tricky part. So here's the S&P 500 split between the earnings power value, blue, and the market implied value growth, green. Now, I call it the market implied value growth because I take the enterprise value of the organization, subtract off the earnings power value, blue, and the difference is clearly what? Growth. So this is, green is the growth. Now, here's the part that I find fascinating. Blue is based on earnings power, cash flow, what the company can do, what management's going to do. Green is based on investor expectations. So you want to know why investing is so hard? It's not blue. We're all really good at blue. We do all kinds of research, modeling, all of that. Green, that's the hard part. Why? Because that is investor expectations about future growth. That's that animal spirits. You want to translate this everyday talk? Just take a PE. Take half the PE, in this case, half the PE, that is your earnings power value. The rest of that PE is growth. Why do PEs go up and down? Because investor expectations about future growth go up and down. So if you want to be a great investor, everyone says just figure out blue. No, you got to figure out blue and what is green going to do over time. That becomes the hard part. All right, so let's just take a look at it. This is your earnings power value as a percent of your enterprise value for the S&P 500. I go back to 09 because if you go before that, you have to deal with the crash, and it really messes up the charts, and I really like pretty charts. You can go back as far as you want, but those blow it up. All right, so there's your market, that's your earnings power value as a percentage of your enterprise value for the S&P 500 for the last, I guess we're now 14 years. And you can see is that it's at a 14-year low. Now, what I can do then is calculate the inverse of that, which is that your market implied value of growth. That would be obviously the other part of it as a percentage. And you can see what's pretty cool. In October of 2020, we reached an all-time high. And people were talking at the time, they said, wow, this value seems high, stock seems high, the market seems high. Well, guess what? It was. And the part that's really interesting is we're almost back to exactly that same point. And if this feels like an expensive market, it is. Now, I don't like thinking that things are cheap or things are expensive because I don't know what to do with that. What I like to think about is expectations are low or expectations are high. And so growth expectation, that green, is what really drives stocks, that green value. And so market implied expectations of growth, market implied value of growth is very high, as high as it's been. Now, part of the S&P is driven by these magnificent seven or whatever we're calling them, and that's driving some of this. But nonetheless, what we're paying for today in growth is the highest we've paid, and certainly as far as back as I've seen that information. Now, this is interesting, it gives you a sense of the market. Where I think it becomes fun is when you look at companies. So I've just translated these charts, this chart here, into an annual chart because I want to do a quick transformation. So that's exactly the same thing. This is market implied value, I'm sorry, the earnings power value, blue, market implied value of growth, green, but just at the end of the year rather than that continuous series. Now, we can use this on a company, so I thought, well, let's talk about Apple. It's the largest holdings at Berkshire Hathaway, and how would it do on this little analysis? So there's your market implied value growth for Apple and your earnings power value for Apple. And what I find most intriguing is other than in 2021, when we had this thing called COVID and everyone was home and everybody upgraded their computer systems, I certainly did, new computer, new phone, new headsets, 2 pair because you might lose them. Other than that, Apple has not grown its earnings power value in 4 years, and before that it hadn't grown it in 7 years. And despite that, market implied value growth is as high as we've ever seen it. Now, the other thing I take away from this chart is, when did Warren make his first purchase of Apple? In 15 and 16. How much was he paying for growth? Nothing. When was their most recent purchase? Recently. How much are they paying for growth? A lot. So the type of this Apple, so Apple is this great iconic brand. Their numbers last night sucked, but no, it's a great iconic brand. It's going to grow forever. I don't know, paying a lot for growth. Keep in mind, green is what you're paying for in terms of expectation. That's future delivery. So there you have it. We've done some more work. If I could have 2 more slides, there'd be more fun stuff. But I'm not going to fix health care.
So, you know, I would give you those 2 extra slides, but I have these xenopsychopath minders.
Yes, I know.
Who,
believe me, I dealt with them. They're tough.
Do you have minders at Columbia?
Do I have?
Minders.
No.
So
I have somewhat free reign.
This is a totally selfish question, because I think there are a number of people in the room whose intellects I admire, who I think would make amazing teachers. But can you, this is totally selfish. What was your path to becoming a teacher? And how did you decide, because you also run money, to allocate your time between teaching students and running money?
They're both we'll take this. Yeah, you have this. I have to talk with my hand.
So generous.
All right, so the story of how I became a teacher is pretty funny. I had graduated from business school, and I was working at First Boston. I went to University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School, and in the EMBA program, the executive program. And I was working at First Boston. I was 30 years old. And this guy named Charlie Wolf, who seemed so old at the time. He was 50. And he came into my office, and he said, "Hey, do you want to teach business school?" Graduate from business school like 8 minutes before. I said, "Sure, when I'm old like you, that would be great." This is July. And he said, July 92. He says, "No, I was thinking September." I was like, "What?" And he gave me a little bit of a backstory, very long story. I can't tell the whole thing, but Graham had taught from 27 to 56. Roger Murray, which I wrote a book about, he taught from 56 to 77. Program had done nothing until that point. It had been died. And he said, "You can teach the security analysis class Graham taught." I was like, "What?" Okay, let me see. Maybe I'll go do it. And I agreed to do it. And I said, "Charlie, why can't you teach?" Because he said, "I'm getting married." And I said, "What marriage is this?" He said, "This is my 5th marriage." I said, "Charlie, no due respect, but maybe you're better at teaching than being married, but I'm going to go out on a limb here." So I went up to teach, and I discovered 2 things. 1, I loved it. Instantly. It was like, this is great. And 2, I realized, this is the important part of the answer, is I synthesize out loud. What does that mean? I process stuff, I read, I do all this stuff, and then when I'm in class, my best thoughts, my best observation, my best connections are completely spontaneous. And at the end of class, I make notes. So I discovered that for me to learn, I need to teach. That's where it all comes together. And so I've taught, and I've been going back ever since. I teach in June, a block week. That's a 1-week class. It'll be my 59th semester-long course. I've taught 3,500 MBA students. I've taught 6.5% of the alumni of Columbia Business School that's still alive. I've taught more classes than Graham and Murray combined. And if, in a couple of years, I'll have more than Murray, Graham, Murray, and Greenwald combined. So kind of fun. Keep going.
So I'm going to end with another selfish question.
Okay.
And maybe Miles is involved here. Miles has been hugely involved here, as you can see. We'll take one question from Steve Clapham, who's also a teacher and an analyst and an awesome guy.
I'm an amateur, though. I mean, you're a professional. In 2011, the bars went negative.
Yeah.
Why was that?
It's really interesting is that basically people were, now keep in mind, the one thing I didn't tell you is this is market implied value of NOPAT growth or earnings growth. And in 11, basically people thought that there'd be significant pressure on profitability. And so they were forecasting negative earnings in the next year. And so you actually had negative market implied value growth for NOPAT. That's what happened in 11. And then things took off.
But that's implying that the future value forever would
Correct,
be,
correct.
Would be negative.
That was crazy.
That seems bizarre.
Correct. And this tool, to me, I've been playing with this for a long time, but it's really come together in the last year or so. For me, this is, I look at every company I look at this as the very first thing. Because blue, we know a lot about. Green's the tricky part. And if I can see what I'm dealing with on green, particularly historically, it's really powerful.
Okay, well, maybe catch up with you.
Okay, great. Oh, I'd love to, yes.
I want to ask one last selfish question. Tell us the story of the most important thing, and you did an extra edition, if I understand correctly. Tell us how that happened.
All right, so the most important thing, so my friend Miles and I have been very close friends since 2000, I guess, so 25 years. Amazing. He's the best book editor in the whole wide world. You should, if you write books, you should have one of those as a friend. I'm just saying, it's good to have. So Miles calls me up and he says, I convinced Howard Marks to write a book. I said, wow, great, great. He said, I want you to, will you take a look at it ahead of time, the early manuscript. And I said, how much of this story can I tell? And I said, sure. So he sends it to me and I read it and I said, the whole thing. And I call him up and I said, I have good news and bad news. And he said, what's that? I said, the first half of the book is brilliant. It's the book I wish I could write. The second half of the book is so bad you shouldn't print it. True, right? He sends a nicer note to Howard, and Howard rewrote the second half, so it went from god-awful to just bad. But the first half of the book is risk, his market efficiencies, that stuff is really powerful. So a couple of years later, probably 2, Miles said, this is the time when ebooks were going to take over. We're never going to have a physical book again. And Miles called me up and said, I think we could do something on an ebook that'd be really cool, where we have people annotate it, and those would pop up in the ebook. And then we'll just print it if we need to. But at this point, ebooks are going to take over. So we did this project together, and he went and got Seth, and he got Chris Davis, and he got Joel Greenblatt to do it. And so the 4 of us annotated it. That was a great project, really fun. So yeah.
Paul, thank you so much. Great honor to have you here. You've helped me learn a lot.